welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. I am your host, James Just. With me is Mr. John Cameron. How you doing this week? How you doing this week, John?
I'm doing very well. Doing very well. I'm highly entertained by, I was going to say news, but it's not really news.
No, it's
by the propaganda machines of the left and the right.
Yeah. It is. That is the one thing. If you kind of disassociate yourself from the panic of either one side or the other, and you just kind of watch it as entertainment, it is kind of entertaining. I mean, it's like watching a soap opera in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's the American soap opera, day 180 or whatever it is. These are the days of your lives, right? Mm-hmm. As the world turns, all that kind of stuff. But
as the world burns. Yeah.
As the world burns. That's a good segue into our first topic, because after 75 days, Los Angeles has issued a whole whopping 4, John, building permits. And I somehow think there's more than 4 people ready to rebuild their houses.
Now, just think. That's probably about 5 times as fast as they would have if it wasn't for the fire. It takes forever to get a building permit. Yeah. So they're probably celebrating those 4. I think it's ridiculous. If it was in Texas, they'd already be finishing 100 houses. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane how long. You know, in California, we declare emergencies so the government can do things quickly. But yet, when we as
sorry, it choked on that one.
Individuals have an emergency and we need things done quickly, the government literally doesn't allow us. And this is not just a one-time thing, John. We know this. We know this from Paradise. We know this from almost every other place that has had some kind of disaster in California. It takes forever to recover, not because they don't have the money, not because they don't have the will, but because the government literally gets in the way. And deliberately so.
What is it? Laissez-faire? Leave us alone.
Yeah.
Right? Leave us alone. We'll fix it. Yeah.
I mean, it's like they're so worried about us hurting ourselves or harming our communities or whatnot that they're willing to destroy your community.
No, they're not. They're just control freaks, and they want money, and they want employees, and they want money, and they want power. They don't care about people. If they care about people, they'd quit their job and let people take care of themselves.
Or if they cared about people, they'd be pushing more than 4 permits through in 75 days.
Well, how about they pull barriers out of the way? Instead of trying to get people to do something, just whoosh, step out of the way, right?
Yeah, get them out the way.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't allow people with resources to come in and clean up their yards until the city had to come do it because they worried about, toxic chemicals, but the toxic chemicals came from the freaking electric cars. So these are problems we didn't used to have. You used to be able to just go in there, clear out your property, and start rebuilding. And you can't do that in California because the government hasn't told you it's safe.
In Paradise, it took them a year before they started cutting down the burned trees. A year.
This is how quickly this bureaucracy works. And that's in emergencies, John. That's when everybody wants them to move fast.
Well, then you have to have your meeting so you can plan how to move fast.
And you have to apply for your grant so you can get the money to plan for how to move fast. And then next thing you know,
you have to make sure all the people are licensed and certified and part of the group that knows how to request the money for the planning meeting. We could go on literally all show.
We could literally sit here and keep coming up with all the different variables. Have you cleared the land yet so you can, made your defensible space yet? We can't, until you give defensible space, you can't build your new foundation in. Oh, but you need permits to take down the trees to build your defensible space. Oh, well, those are going to take some time.
You don't need defensible space because all the trees are burned down.
Yeah.
You need the permit to take out the trees that are already burned down, and that would make the defensible space.
Yeah, but they won't let you do it. And then, hey, we need an environmental impact report on this because...
No, we don't. The environment's messed up. Just build a house. You can clean it up later.
Yeah, well, the neighborhoods were already there. Why do you need a new environmental impact report? It just gets on dumber and dumber. But as we talk about dumber and dumber, John, Richard Fields has something to say about this Signal group chat thing that has been going on this last week or so. So let's find out what Richard has to say about this week.
This should be interesting.
Hi, this is Richard Fields with this week's Report from the Fields. In mid-March, Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, was added to a Signal group chat including top U.S. military brass and intelligence personnel that ultimately discussed plans for United States military forces to attack the Houthis in Yemen. The plans discussed on that group chat were eventually successfully carried out. Signal, although encrypted, is a commercial operation, not a government-controlled secure communications platform. Here's the background. The Houthis are an Iran-backed rebel group in Yemen who effectively control much of that country. To show support for Hamas, they have been launching rocket and drone attacks on ships in the Red Sea, effectively shutting down shipping through the Suez Canal and forcing ships to travel around the southern tip of Africa to get from the Middle East to Europe. Goldberg did what any self-respecting journalist would do. He reported on what happened in his magazine. Blame for the incident looks like a circular firing squad. The Trump administration is denying that there was any national security breach. There was. They are also attacking Goldberg, who is just the messenger. The left-leaning press is piling on the Trump Department of Defense hierarchy for their lax approach to national security. The right-leaning press is attacking Goldberg and The Atlantic for doing its job and violating secrecy laws. What's not happening is a robust effort by the press to defend a journalist for doing his job and questioning why those government secrecy laws exist in the first place. In a just world, the people should be able to protect their secrets, and the government should be totally transparent. Another thing not happening, although Vice President Vance mentioned it in the chat, are serious questions about why the U.S. is getting involved in a shooting war on the other side of the world when only 3% of American shipping is affected by the effective closure of the Suez Canal. But the majority of European shipping is very much affected. It's high time for two things to happen. First, the United States needs to quit involving itself in other countries' fights, whether it's Israel versus Hamas, the Houthi rebels versus the government of Yemen, Ukraine versus Russia, China versus Taiwan, Azerbaijan versus Armenia, and rebels versus the governments in Sudan, Myanmar, the Sahel, and Haiti. Have we learned nothing from our hideously unsuccessful and extremely expensive adventures taking sides in the wars between, Iraq and Kuwait, Afghanistan and the Taliban, North and South Vietnam, North and South Korea, etc.? Second, it's time for journalists to start defending free speech instead of condemning those who practice it, like Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and now Jeffrey Goldberg. Government malfeasance and self-destructive policy is the issue here, not reporters exposing it. I'm Richard Fields, and that's this week's Report from the Fields. See you again next week.
The city to, anyway. All right, thank you, John. Me and John were sitting here having a conversation about the Oregon Trail. So I'm sitting here listening to Richard. So that's so sometimes we get bored over here in the studio. But I'm kind of bored with this whole thing, to be honest, John, because it's, as we talk in the story here coming up, it's the hypocrisy on both sides of this thing. Care or don't, but just be consistent. You know, I don't really care. If you want to care, care. If you don't want to care, don't care. Well, just don't pick and choose, right?
It annoys me that the what's really hilarious is that the New York Times decided they needed a guest opinion piece, a big guest opinion piece, by a person that they considered an expert in security, in keeping state secrets secret, and someone with a lot of experience in this area, to point out what the current administration's Defense Department and Vice President and everybody should have done. And guess who? Well, you already know, but I'll give our thousands of viewers 5 seconds to guess who that person was.
No, this is going to be the oddest 5 seconds. There you go.
Hillary Clinton. So this is the woman who erased, what was it, 30,000 emails, that she had a private server in her home that wasn't secure, where she was basically sending and receiving messages that had to do with our spy service, foreign agents, probably because it's Hillary, all sorts of graft and corruption, you know, and the bribes coming in and favors being handed out. And this was discovered, and instead of her being, you know, thrown in jail for it, they didn't attach the server. They let her delete. Was it 3,000 or 30,000?
It was some ridiculous amount. The bleach bit thing, where she essentially just deleted the whole hard drive. Yeah. And so however many, you don't actually know how many emails are.
And she said, "Oh no official secrets were at risk," but you know, the Secretary of State communicates, and this is why we don't even need a Secretary of State, folks. There's no reason we need to be involved in skullduggery, where if it was discovered, spies that we shouldn't have in the first place might be at risk. Right? Yeah. I mean, why are we doing that? We are not an imperial, well, we are an imperial country, but we don't need to be one. You know, why do we have all these spies and all these people meddling all over the world, and why is what they're doing secret? If what they're doing is beneficial, then shouldn't it be on the front page of the New York Times? Shouldn't we be touting their activities? Obviously, they're doing something nefarious, or we're hiding it.
Yeah, so, at least somebody's going to find it nefarious, right? Even if it's not us that's going to find it nefarious, somebody else is.
Well, and I actually like the fact that you would have never heard if we were in one of the meetings that, we can't call it Biden's State Department was running, because he wasn't running it.
Yeah, it was the DNC State Department.
Obama's third term. Let's call it Obama's third term. Yeah. There would have been nobody in there having strong positions in opposition to somebody, because it's all groupthink. It's that people all agreed with each other, which is one of the problems. They never called each other out. But you got J.D. Vance saying, like, as Richard said, why are we even worried about this? Like 3% of our trade travels through the Suez Canal. All of Europe's trade, you know, the people, if they're worried about it, shouldn't Europe's navies, oh wait, they don't have any, be you know, bombing the crap out of these Houthis? And if we know there's not even a dotted line between Iran and the Houthis and Hamas and all the rest of that, it's a straight line. It's a straight money line, supply line, drones, arms, equipment. Everybody knows it. They brag about it. So, you know, the problem is Iran.
Yeah.
And eventually you have to realize that a religious dictatorship that has the morals of medieval, criminals, something needs to be done.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. China and Europe should get together and protect that, because that's who uses that strait, right? China sends their goods through the strait to get to Europe.
We can't have the Chinese Navy there.
Oh God, no! That would be
terrible.
Somebody else be the world's police? Oh. Heaven forbid. All right, but I am going to disagree with you on one thing, John.
What?
Hillary Clinton is an expert on being insecure. So in a sense, she is a perfect person to write about it.
That's true.
So
she's an expert on being a fool, so she should write about fools.
Fools. Yeah. Now, RFK, we're going to move on.
Another fool.
This is another one of these articles that I think Anthony. Yep. Nope. You're actually right. I was wrong on my end. Sorry, guys. Sorry to the crew inside. You guys are correct. The House passed a bill to boost transparency on the foreign funding in higher education. Yeah. Yeah, I skipped down the page. One, two. Yeah. Sorry.
I saw you do that, but I thought you had a reason.
No, I just messed up.
Okay.
So the House has passed a bill to boost transparency in foreign funding in higher education, because we've seen China has bought a lot of influence with a lot of our universities. This is a direct response to China. It's not a response to anything else. Let's not pretend otherwise.
So we're not worried about everybody else's funding of higher education, like all the crazy wacko pro-Palestinian groups that are pulling the strings behind all these protests and making it impossible for Jewish kids to go to class. We're not worried about that. We're only worried about China.
We're only worried. That's the response. Now, those other people may get caught up in this, but the real thing is it's after China. China has, has put a lot of influence in a lot of our major universities.
Mm-hmm.
And for better or for worse, whether we care or not, but transparency, we are all for transparency.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So,
I mean, where's the money coming from? And then you can figure out why when you see where it's coming from. I mean, if Chinese money's paying for a research grant in the physics department, or in biology, or in engineering, or political science, then you know exactly what's happening. They're going to take the information that comes out of the labs or the think tanks, wipe the serial numbers off, and use it in China. They're going to use our brains, their money, to pay for our brains, producing stuff that they're going to violate patents on in China and sell it to us for 1/3 the cost that we can produce it here. So it's pretty straightforward, but we want to know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, just so people can make rational decisions.
The only problem I have with it is that now they've put some limits on the amount of money. If it's above, it used to be above like $250,000, I guess you had to track it. Now it's 50, and you have to get, if it's from one of these questionable states like Russia or China, you have to get government approval, which means it'll take 6 more years to get the grant than before.
Which is part of the problem, right? You can start with a good idea. Hey, let's make sure we get transparency, and then they start adding controls on the other end. It's not just transparency; now it's control.
If you have control, then the Chinese know they have to bribe you first.
Well, John, sometimes we sit here and we chat about these things, and we come up with a real answer at the end of the conversation. There, yeah, I think you've maybe nailed that one. So, Esquire magazine put out an article the other day.
They're even-handed in their reporting. Yes, they are.
Yeah. So Esquire magazine. This is just simply the title of this article, right? RFK is one of the greatest weirdos to ever occupy a position of power, right? And his policy choices prove it. Now, policy choices, people disagree with policy choices all the time, but RFK is the greatest weirdo to ever occupy a position of power in the United States. That's a pretty huge claim, considering
That's a reach.
all the freaking weirdos have been the last couple hundred years.
You look on look at the House of Representatives. I mean, those people are wackos.
Yeah, it doesn't take much of a research to find people stranger than RFK.
No, RFK is strange. The bug ate part of his brain. And he dropped a bear in. But I like it because he doesn't have a filter. He just tells people everything, and they're acting as if the fact that he's on his watch, they're firing a ton of people, and somehow food's going to be less safe and disease is going to run rampant and all the rest of that. They're acting under the assumption that these people were actually doing something worthwhile. And the point to this whole show, I think, and next week's show, is going to be this. Those people aren't doing anything worthwhile. They're just getting in the way. They're getting in the way and handing out favors, and they're not making us any safer. They're not getting drugs to market quicker. They're not making sure the COVID vaccine, for example, was safe. They're doing none of that. They're just getting paid and getting in the way. So fire a bunch of them. What's wrong with that?
All they're really doing is taking money from average taxpayers and giving it to
themselves.
Bureaucrats. That's literally all they're doing.
Yeah,
and they're just passing it around. It's like a big circle jerk.
Yeah.
So that's really what that whole story was all about. There's just not much. It's the way the media is portraying this, right? You have to demonize anybody you disagree with. You can't simply just say, hey, we disagree with him firing 14,000 workers or whatever it is, because we think it's going to diminish the ability of the health department to respond to needs, right? You can make that argument without calling somebody a weirdo, the biggest weirdo ever in power.
And you could have somebody who's not weird make exactly the same decision.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say I'm not weird, but I'm crazy eccentric, folks. I like to think I'm eclectic, but I'm eccentric.
Well, the thing is, everybody's weird, John. If you're not a little weird, you're not a real human being.
And you're boring.
Yeah, at best you're boring.
Normal is boring. We don't want boring on the show, folks.
No. So, boring is Joe Rogan has kind of started a firestorm a little bit over, he breaks with Trump over the Venezuelan deportation. Essentially, a long-term person who at some point was here legally, I believe. Then at some point he overstayed a visa or something. Anyway, he wrongly got deported to a El Salvadorian prison. Now this is
Was it Venezuelan prison?
No, because they sent the Venezuela because Venezuela won't take their people back.
Ah.
So they send them to El Salvador, and El Salvador houses them in that prison that Burley guy has down there. So they're sending a bunch of these MS-13 gang members, is what most of them are. And so a couple of people have kind of gotten wrongly caught up in these sweeps. One or two of them have gotten sent down to Venezuela, and Trump administration is kind of doing the same thing. They don't admit they're wrong, and so they find some excuse, you know, that yes, 20 years ago this guy really was a member of MS-13.
Or in this case, I think the one particular thing that really got to Joe, and it gets to me, is this guy's gay, and he had some tattoos, and somebody said, "Oh, because of those tattoos, you're a member of whatever," and so if you're going to send people out, do a little homework. You got time.
Well,
right?
the thing was, he had actually those originally the tattoos were because he was a gang member.
He was a member of the gang.
But then he had added a picture of his mother and father on them to change them because he had moved on from his life.
Yeah, he's a hairdresser or beautician
yes, something
or something.
Like that.
He's gay and he's going to have a tough time in prison. And you know, if I'm going to feel sorry for anybody and want them to be really careful about vetting people they send back, especially if they're going to end up in a prison in El Salvador, it's the Venezuelans, because that country is a disaster. It is corrupt. The president that's in now didn't win the election. He lost. He's brutal. He's a lunatic. He's socialist. He's ruined the country that had the best standard of living in the Western Hemisphere at one time before they ruined it. Higher GDP, better educated. They were sitting on the biggest pot of oil in the world. And just to prove how bad socialists can screw things up, at one time people were eating zoo animals in the country because there wasn't any food on the shelf.
Yeah,
so,
the only reason they stopped because they ran out of zoo animals.
No.
Yeah,
pretty much.
It's not like they stopped because they stopped because they ran out of animals.
A lot of zoos around the world went down and at risk of life and limb and got some of them out of there. But let's be careful with those folks, because we're supposed to be opening our arms, Statue of Liberty, to people who want to leave places like that and come here and make a better life. Now, because we're doing such a, I think whoever's running the Biden administration, it wasn't Biden, let the worst of the worst in intentionally, because they wanted chaos. I don't know why. Maybe so they could crack down on the chaos at some point. But let's be a little more careful sending people back.
Yeah. Whether you agree with the deportations or not, we all can think that a basic level of due process is something that every human being is entitled to.
Just because somebody is here illegally doesn't mean that we can do things illegally to get rid of them. Yeah. If somebody else breaks the law, we're still required to follow the law of our land to make sure their basic human rights are protected if we're going to ship them back. I don't think, other than people who are, and don't get me started on drug wars and drug gangs. If you legalize the stuff, that all goes away. If these people are bad people and they're doing a lot of crime, they're robbing, they're thieving, they're raping, they're murdering, then
send them to the El Salvadorian prison, right? But make sure you're sending the right people. If you're going to do it, make sure you're dang clear. You don't want to be sending an American citizen to El Salvador. And that will happen at some point. Just because, as we know, we've discussed all day how incompetent the bureaucracy is, and this is still the same bureaucracy. So, France has decided to jail Marie Le Pen. Now, this is one of these things.
Not jail.
No, she got a 4-year prison sentence.
She what?
She got a 4-year prison sentence.
But they waived it, I think. This is there's, if you look at this story, there's a completely different angle on this story than the BBC report that I'd like to talk about. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, let's catch everybody up with what's happened. She was accused of misappropriating EU funds to pay for a bodyguard. That's kind of essentially, it's like less than $400,000 is the accusation, right? And for that, it's a 4-year sentence. Now, whether they waived it or whatever, but they've also banned her from running for office for 5 years.
Which was the goal.
Which was the real goal, because that's actually what the judge in the courtroom, when he sentenced her, he says, you have damaged democracy. That's got nothing to do with a money laundering case or an embezzlement charge. Doesn't hurt. A $400,000 embezzlement charge doesn't do anything to democracy. But jailing someone who's leading in the polls does.
And who's on what they call the far right, and yeah, she's a little bit of a fascist. I mean, that's like saying somebody's a little dead. But the people in Europe are tired of mass immigration. They're tired of the bureaucracy. They're tired of all the rules, and this is happening in every country in Europe. And so people are voting for what the Democrats call populists. If it was a popular Democrat, they'd call it democracy. But if it's a popular person who's what we would call either libertarian or conservative, then it's populism. And it turns out that another French politician did exactly, the same thing. Took money from one pot that they weren't supposed to pay for something. It was, I think, for political purposes when it was supposed to be used for something else. Political purposes are supposed to be, the money is supposed to come from, political donations. And they just slapped him on the wrist and said fine, and they ran for high office. So, but they were on the left. So this is a person who's on the right. And so that's what they're doing, just like what they're doing in Brazil. You know, they don't like the candidate. The candidate would win if they ran, so they convict them of some crime that they are also guilty of, so they can't run for office. And that's the way we do things. Oh, like with Trump.
Yeah, and here's the thing, you know, for those of us who kind of understand history, the left is literally repeating the exact same steps the Weimar Republic did in Germany pre-Hitler, pre the Nazis. They're literally following the same prescription. You jail them, you silence them, you disenfranchise their voters, you ignore their basic desires, and they're following the script, John. They're literally following the script on how to make an actual Nazi.
But these people aren't, let's be clear, these people aren't Nazis.
No.
They're simply conservatives who are labeled far right because they don't want an open door to immigration, and the immigrants are not.
We are out of time, John. We are out of time. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for working so hard in there. Thank you for watching. Have a good night, and please remember to love everybody.
Sorry, Jane. Yes, especially those who do not yet know enough